Here's to whiskey kisses with the peachy taste of sin.
Greetings, whiskey folk, and welcome back once again to my kitchen here in beautiful Victoria, British Columbia. This is Drinking Out Loud, and I am your host, Adam Bradshaw. Now, a very special welcome, of course, to Dram Association members, and an equally special welcome, I guess, to anyone who's randomly stumbled across this video from the far depths of the interwebs. These are a series of videos designed to keep our club entertained, educated, and libated, I guess, during the COVID outbreak. So whilst this is very much tailored to our local members here in Victoria, BC, hopefully the rest of you will get some enjoyment out of this as well. Now today, spring is officially in the air. Our lilac tree in the backyard is blossoming, and Springbank, it just makes sense, doesn't it? Not that you really need an excuse to drink Springbank, but it seems like a pretty good one to me. So first of all, of course, always a very good idea to stretch. So I'm going to start off today with this beautiful wee dram. I've already had a couple of sips in preparation, and I'm always amazed at how good this whiskey is. This is not Springbank, but this is Springbank adjacent. Yeah. Lovely sort of wood, but also a minerality. There's a soft smoke going on. It kind of, on the nose, evokes this this memory of having a beautiful bonfire in the forest, but then it starts to rain. You know, remember that sound when the raindrops hit a hot stone and sort of sizzles? And then as the fire slowly starts to die down and smoke as it succumbs to the weather? Yeah, that's a great nose. It also reminds me a lot of tinned peaches. Something I don't have very often anymore. I should get some tinned peaches. They're delightful. Probably a very good thing to have around right now in the outbreak as well. I feel like I'm not getting as much fresh fruit as I used to, as we're not going to the supermarket very often. Yeah, lovely sweet orchard fruit, quite a lot of wood on the palate. It's not in an over oaked kind of way, but very much that sort of American oak butterscotchy vanilla thing going on. But also, like I said, yeah, tinned peaches. It's gorgeous. The smoke is still there on the palate. I've always been a fan of lightly smoked whiskies. I like it when the peat and the smoke is integrated with the rest of the flavors. This is a perfect example of that. And this is not only a fantastic starting whiskey, it's a fantastic whiskey in general. It's a good way to get the pumps primed, but this is fantastic value. As I mentioned, this is not Springbank, but this is Springbank adjacent. Some of you might have guessed already. This is the Kilkerran 12. Kilkerran 12, beautiful bottle, distilled at Glengyle Distillery. There's a story there. Glengyle Distillery, the rights to the name Glengyle, in terms of whiskey branding, were not owned by by Mitchell's. I should mention as well, yes, this is very much intertwined with Springbank, not only with its location and its history, but also its ownership. These guys are actually owned by the same company. And yeah, so Glengyle Distillery had to release their whiskey under a different name. Actually, I think it says something about that on the back label here. Mitchell's Glengyle Limited are very proud to be continuing and adding to the great Campbellton distilling tradition, and the choice of name reflects that. Kilkerran is derived from the Gaelic, Cairn Loch Kilkerran, or something along those lines, which is the name of the original settlement where St. Kieran had his religious cell, and Campbellton now stands. Kilkerran is thought to be a suitable name for New Campbellton malt, since it's unusual for the old Campbellton distilleries to be named after a glen, a custom more usually associated with the Speyside region. So, funny thing, as far as I'm aware, the reason that Glengyle cannot release their whiskey under the name Glengyle is because it was owned for a brief period of time by the third, I guess, Campbellton distillery, Glen Scotia. So, although they own Glengyle Distillery, they don't own the name Glengyle, nor the rights to the branding of Glengyle. So I can't help but think that the back label is a bit of a passive-aggressive jab at Glen Scotia. The name Glen is only for Speyside whiskies. It's silly to have it in a Campbellton malt, despite the fact that there's 3 Campbellton distilleries and 2 of them are Glen somethings. I mean, maybe in the day, yeah. Traditionally, I'm sure most of the distilleries in Campbellton were not named after Glens, seeing as they're in a town on the peninsula and there's not that many Glens around. It's not like Speyside where you turn another corner and there's another bloody Glen. But yeah, no, interesting little malt. I love this whiskey, I really do. I've not had many different Kilkerrans. There's not been many available. In fact, I think this is the only one that's been officially available here in BC. I've been lucky enough to try some elsewhere. But yeah, it's a great wee malt, and it's fantastically well priced as well. At the moment, it's $108.61 on our web store. As ever, we put things on special as we feature them in these videos for a brief period of time after this first airs. It will be available for $95.96 for an official bottling, non-chill filtered, no colour added, 12-year-old 46% malt that's lightly peated. That is stunning. This is a stunning whiskey. As you can tell, I'm been enjoying it myself for a while now. I think I got this bottle about 1.5 years ago. And for those of you thinking, it's taken you 1.5 years to get through that much, I have a lot of whiskey, okay? I'm one of these guys that likes to have, if I'm sitting at home, I'm having a whiskey night, which is not every night, but if I'm having a whiskey night, I'll try and have 3, 4, 5, maybe 6 whiskeys in an evening, and I want them all to be different. I also want them to be whiskeys that I've not had in the last 2 weeks. I don't know why. I like exploring whiskey in that sense. So, actually, this is one of the bottles that I've gone through relatively quickly for the amount of time that I've had it. Most of the bottles where I'm down to the last quarter like this are ones that have been in my collection for 3 years or so. So, good job, Kilkerran. You keep me coming back. Great wee malt. So yeah, Kilkerran, very much intertwined with Springbank, but Springbank is what we're all about with this episode. I've even got the little badge here. Thanks to Frank Hudson for picking this up from me from his last trip to Scotland. For those of you who want to get in my book, my good books, I do collect the pin badges, the lapel pins from various distilleries. So if you happen to go to Scotland, which I know many of you, myself included, were planning on going to Scotland this year, and that's probably not happening anymore. But yeah, for those of you who are thinking, oh, that Adam's a nice guy, I should bring him a little something back, but I don't have room in my case for a whiskey. Hopefully you've got room in your case for a little pin, because that's a nice way to curry favour with me. But no, in all seriousness, thank you very much, Frank Hudson, for bringing me some pins back. I really had this weird enjoyment of collecting the pins. And yeah, so let's talk Springbank. So the story of Springbank starts with Archibald Mitchell. And Archibald Mitchell was the founder of Springbank, and it's still family owned to this day by Jane A. Mitchell Company. It's run by Hedley Wright, who I believe is the 5th generation descendant of Archibald, which is pretty cool. Archibald's story didn't start, however, with Springbank. It started in Campbellton at another distillery where he was a partner called Rychlachen Distillery. And Rychlachen Distillery was just down the road from Springbank on Longrow Street. And it's actually started in 1825, I believe. Springbank, just 3 years later, 1828, was built down the road. And yeah, Campbellton at the time was an absolute sort of powerhouse for whiskey production. Like nothing, I don't think there's anywhere in the world that has ever been or will ever be like Campbellton. I mean, I know, there's a couple of places in Kentucky which have quite a few distilleries and make quite a lot of whiskey these days. In terms of factory size capacity, they probably way outdo Campbellton, but in terms of the sheer amount of quality distilleries and the sheer impact they had on the industry, like Campbellton was a key player back in the day. It's, I believe, around the size of Souk, so not very big at all. Tiny wee town, and at the height of its time, it had about 36 distilleries, and the Mitchells were involved in many of them. They were all over the town. So not only did Archibald start off at Rychlachen, where his brother then carried on after he left and built Springbank, of course. His sister started a distillery called Drumore, and his son, John, later founded Glengyle, the Kilkerran malt being the new whiskey from the rebuilt. I don't know if it was rebuilt or just structured. It's still the same sort of shell of a building. Anyway, by the late 19th century, Campbellton was reportedly the richest town per capita, like per head, in the entire, not just country, but British Empire, which is mind-blowing. Like, this wee town on the Kintyre, on the Kintyre Peninsula. I've got bloody beetles going around in my head. On the Kintyre Peninsula, this just wee town got such a massive name for itself. Why was it such a hotspot for whiskey? Well, it was perfectly placed. It was a great trading post. The bay there was able to take in many ships at a time, which meant that raw ingredients and casks could come into the town and whiskey could leave. It was a really easy spot to get to, not only London, which was of course a massive buyer of Scotch whiskey, in Ireland, but later on all the way out to the colonies, all the way over to Australia, over the way to North America. It was transport was key, I think, to Campbellton's success. It really was. So we're going to start off in this Springbank journey with their flagship malt. This is the Springbank 10-year-old. So much like the flagship Kilkerran is the Kilkerran 12, the flagship Springbank is the Springbank 10. I'd say from memory at least, the Springbank 10 is a little peatier than the Kilkerran 12. And I think most of the time when you've got peat, you don't need as much age. You want that peat to shine. So dropping it down for the standard release from 10 years old instead of a more common, I guess, 12 makes a lot of sense. It really does. Let's get this Kilkerran out of here. Alright, let's make some room for the Springbank. Beautiful. So this is, again, 46%. Again, I believe non-chill filtered. No colouring. Yeah. What's it say on the label this time? Springbank is unique among Scotland distilleries. Every part of the process from malting to bottling is carried out at the distillery. It's true. I mean, and not just malting to bottling. Literally everything in between, like milling, mashing, obviously distilling, maturation. But yeah, everything is done in-house. It's a beautiful place, and they're really connected with the community. They hire so many people. I can't remember the exact amount of people. I'm sure it fluctuates quite wildly, but it feels like half the town works at Springbank. It's quite cool. And it's like it seems like, I don't know if this is actually true, but it seems like Headley Wright, the guy who runs Springbank right now, doesn't actually have any interest in like making a lot of money. He's not like capitalist by nature. He wants to make a great product and support the community, and that's really what he's doing. Like, if Springbank really wanted to, they could up production, buy more room to distill more whiskey, make 3 times as much whiskey, still sell it all at the same price, and make 3 times as much money. But I don't know, he just doesn't have the drive to. He doesn't want to sacrifice potential quality for that, and he doesn't want to negatively impact the town either. It's a cool story. I like these guys a lot. Where did I get to? Unlike other whiskies, Springbank single malt is free of artificial colouring. It is also non-chill filtered. And that's not just this, it's all of their releases. No artificial colouring, no chill filtration. This will leave a slight natural haze to form when it is cold, but this will disappear when the temperature returns to normal. And that's the sad thing. I mean, most of you will have heard this before, but the big reason for chill filtration is Hollywood, right? Is you put ice in your whiskey because on film, whiskey looks a lot better with ice in it. And that's kind of makes sense, right? It's kind of flat and boring without ice in it, especially in a tumbler glass. But it makes the whiskey go cloudy, which a lot of people will then go, "Oh, there's something wrong with my whiskey. It shouldn't be cloudy. It should be this nice, clear golden colour like it was in the bottle." It was just a natural reaction to the cold. Unfortunately, the only way that they could find to stop that from happening was by ripping some of the fat molecules out of the whiskey, which, not ideal. Anyway, tangent. So Springbank 10, fantastic wee whiskey. So it's got that same sort of key concept of that Kilkerran, actually. It's got that same sort of muted smoke with tropical fruits, but it's just a little bit more stretched in both directions. The smoke is a little stronger, the fruit is a little more tropical. There's more sort of guava-y, mango sort of notes. Actually very guava. Passion fruit too. Like, there's a little sort of more sourness on the nose. Not in an unpleasant way. In a sort of tropical fruit way. Big, rich, thick, malty, dusty. Not only does this tick a personal box for me as being a light to medium level of peat, it also ticks the box of being a fantastic blend of American oak and sherry oak as well. This has so much depth and richness to it. It's got the butterscotch, it's got the coconut, it's got all of those American oak flavors, but it's got stewed plums, it's got raisins, and then it's got the tropical fruit as well. It's like very layered. There's a lot happening in this whiskey. It's nice and thick. It's got a good viscosity to it. Like, I don't know if it's visibly there much. I spilt it on the table. That would be a horrible waste of Springbank. Yeah, I mean, it's a little viscous looking on the legs, but in the mouth it feels nice and full. Yeah, just a gorgeous dram. It's a staple. And it has that one thing that ties Springbank, all the Springbank's products really together for me. And it's that Springbank funk. I've yet to come up with another word that better describes it, but that seems to be, at least locally, the accepted term for that je ne sais quoi, I guess, that Springbank essence. I like to describe it as the same kind of experience as in the springtime, which Springbank, springtime, there we go, we've got that link again. In the springtime, going back to your holiday home, your cabin in the woods, your seaside cabin, your little cottage, whatever it is, that hasn't been entered since the previous fall, and just cracking that door open for the first time in 6 months, and everything's got that slight musty dustiness to it, not in an unpleasant way, but in kind of a welcoming way. Like, it's still the same experience. Like, it's very much your home from home. It's still got all of those connotations, but it's your home from home that you've been missing, and it's welcoming you back inside. And that's kind of the key experience to me of a Springbank. It's very welcoming. It's and it feels really familiar. It's not welcoming in a you're on holiday and you're in somewhere you've never been, and the locals are very welcoming. No, this is welcoming in a pillow kind of a sense. This is you've been out celebrating Hogmanay and it's 3 o'clock in the morning and you've just walked home because you couldn't get a cab, and you've walked from one side of Edinburgh to the other, and you get home and your pillow is just, it feels like your pillow has a halo or a radiant light shining on it. It's just a glorious, welcoming sight, but an oh so familiar sight as well. Yeah, Springbank 10 just never lets me down. I've never not been in the mood for a Springbank 10. In fact, this is one of those whiskies where if I don't know what I want, if I'm feeling a little bit off and indecisive, and I'm a little grumpy maybe, and I'm not sure what I want to drink, you never want to try something wacky and new that you don't know so well when you're in a bad mood. This is a bad mood whiskey. Not in the sense that it puts you in a bad mood, but it lifts you from a bad mood. This is one of those whiskeys where if I have a mild headache but I really want a whiskey, I know that I can pour myself a glass of Springbank and not regret it. Might not necessarily help the headache, but it'll help me forget it. Gorgeous. Springbank, at least a 10, I think, should be a staple in any sort of respectable whiskey collection. you need at least one Springbank. You do. I'm sorry. I don't mean to offend anyone out there who doesn't have a Springbank in their collection, but you're doing it wrong. Springbank is... It's that perfect blend of quality and uniqueness and integrity in a malt. With a beautiful story as well. It just works. Anyway, Springbank 10 normally on our website is $130.35. On sale right now, you can get it for $114.70. Put your teeth back in, Adam. All right. So, yeah, not a bad price. I mean, yes, it's only a 10-year-old, and yes, you could get something like... I mean, it's a very different product, and there's nothing wrong with what I'm about to say. Glenmorangie 10, same price is the only reason I bring it up. Same age, sorry, is the only reason I bring it up. Very, very different whiskies. Glenmorangie 10 is polished, it is clean, there is no bumps at all in that whiskey. This is rough, this is handmade. It's the equivalent of buying a beautiful, sort of factory-made, pristine mug that is just... There's no rough edges on it. It's just a perfect mug, very well designed by some, influential Swiss designer or something. That's your Glenmorangie. And that's a beautiful thing. I love Glenmorangie 10. It's the best-selling malt in Scotland, right? This is that crazy handmade mug you picked up at the farmer's market that every time you go for the coffee, you go, that's my mug. I'm going to put that in my mug. It is unique. That's the one I have. And yeah, it's a big difference between the two. But you see the difference in price as well. Because other 10-year-olds like the Glenmorangie 10 is a lot less expensive. I think Glenmorangie 10 is in the sort of $70, $80 range. So this is, $40 more. This is like 1.5 times that. But if you take into account that it's a small company, a small family-run company, which does everything in-house, they're not at all on any kind of... scale. They're not getting a discount from scale like Glenmorangie is. I think it's a very reasonable price for the product. This is basically a craft Scottish whiskey. I mean, it's a large scale for craft, but it's that kind of essence. It's that kind of product. Anyway, going back to the story. So, yes, Campbellton, huge whiskey region back in the day in the 19th century. Very, very well known, but that kind of came crashing down. They call it the Great Purge in 1920 when most of the distilleries kind of left. There's a few reasons why it happened. Almost all of the distilleries in Campbellton closed, all but 2 eventually closed, Springbank and Glen Scotia. And there's lots of theories and reasons. I mean, the theory that Springbank themselves like to push, of course, is that everyone else started cutting corners and their product wasn't as good, so they survived, everyone else died. It's a fine story, and it's probably very true, but I think there's more to it than that. The decline of Campbellton whiskies almost goes perfectly with the incline of... You getting it? You guessing? Speyside. As one went up, the other went down. And I think there's 2 reasons for that. And those 2 reasons are very interconnected as well, actually. First of all, Speyside was starting to make completely unpeated whiskey. And now this isn't to say, there's this whole idea that back in the day, all Scotch whiskey was peated. And everyone hears that and thinks, oh, it all tasted like Lefroy. Lefroy is the original Scotch whiskey. Everything should taste like Lefroy, and everything did taste like Lefroy. No. There are ways to still use peat as a heat source without imparting that much smoke. Springbank's a great example of this, right? The smoke is there, but it's restrained, it's pared back. And you can go even more restrained than that while still using peat as a heat source. So don't get it in your head that in the 1820s everything tasted like Lefroy. That's bollocks. But there's a certain clean, crisp flavour to our 100% unpeated malt that became really, really favourable, not just in the blending scene, but also in the brand new at the time single malt scene. Nothing was being bottled and sold as a single malt at the time, but gentlemen's clubs, especially down in London, were buying whole casks of unpeated Speyside whiskey. And it was becoming more and more popular, and peated whiskey was getting less and less popular. Seems weird to look at it that way these days, because peated whiskey is on the rise again, but yeah, that's what was happening. And the biggest reason that Speyside was able to do all of this unpeated whiskey is they had easier access to alternative heat sources. And that's because of the railroad. Speyside had a railway leading right to it that connected it with pretty much everywhere else of note in the United Kingdom. And that railroad could bring something called coke, which is a refined form of coal, and was a perfect alternative heat source to peat at the time. You didn't have to change the way your factory was set up, your distillery was set up. You just use coke instead of peat in exactly the same kilns you've been using for 100 years, and you're fine. You can go for it. From what I understand, that was the case. So, railway lines dramatically changed the flavour profile of Scotch whisky at that time, but they also meant that people weren't relying on boats as much. So all of a sudden, being a harbour town, being a port, the Campbellton was no longer at a massive advantage anymore. The trains had taken that advantage away from them. And so I'm sure many of these distilleries were just going, we'll rest on our laurels. We know what we've been doing. We've been doing the same thing for hundreds of years. We're going to just keep cracking at it. And many of them will have fallen to the wayside because they didn't want to change and their quality wasn't up there with everyone else in the country. Sad as it was. So by 1934, that was when there was only two left. And actually the last distillery to close in 1934, before we were left with just the two, Springbank and Glen Scotia, funny enough, was that Wright-Lacken distillery, which is where Archibald Mitchell actually started his journey. So that's where it began, and that was the last sort of domino to fall before it was just the two that we know and love now. So yeah, what is Springbank all about these days? Well, they are still, to this day, about authentic, old-school whiskey and supporting the community. But they are also about creativity. They make three completely different spirits in-house. And this isn't just they make three different levels of peat and they make three different levels of peated whiskey in-house. No, the entire process is actually different. And this is something we talked about recently in the Scotch Malt Whisky Society. The reason that some distilleries have more than one code in the SNWS is not because of levels of peat or different names that they put on bottles, but entirely to do with having different processes in their manufacturing. Right. So their namesake that we have with the Springbank 10 here, the Springbank brand uses partial triple distillation. So that is something they do where they keep the strongest part of the spirit after that second distillation, but then they redistill the rest of it and then blend those two together afterwards. So it's not full triple distillation, it's not just double distillation, it's somewhere in between, much the same, but a hell of a lot less complicated than what Mortlock do with their strange, I remember 2.71 or whatever it is times distillation. I forget what the decimal places are, but 2 point something. But yeah, it's collected at 71%, and that is their classic standard. And the 10, as much as that is the flagship, my favourite of their standards is the 15. 15, I think, is absolutely gorgeous. The big difference over the 10, slightly less peat, a lot more sherry, and more age and integration. That's really the crux of it. And you can even see with the colour, it's not just age. It's not just darker, it's a bit more of a red hue to it as well. You can tell that there's more sherry cask gone into the production of the 15. And not only do I have the 15, I have something very special, which I can't believe I've not actually sat down and done yet. But I actually have, hidden away at the back of my cabinet, an old version of the 15 as well. So I'm going to do a side-by-side of two different expressions of the 15, two different batches with different branding on them as well. So let's get some Glencairns, let's get pouring. So I think the back label on this version of the 15 is exactly the same as the 10. Yeah, literally exactly the same wording, exactly the same layout, different colour, different number. That is all. I'm sure the old one has slightly different text, so I'll take a look at that and take a read of that in a second. Springbank is unique among Scottish distilleries. Every part of the yeah, that's the same. Yep, nope. They're consistent on their text, I'll give them that. Yeah, so just a slightly different design. Everything else on the bottle is still the same. 46%. Still non-chill filtered, uncoloured. Nice. So this is the new, this one's the old. Let's see if there are any noticeable differences. Yeah, it's richer, darker, like the fruit is more cooked. Like there's still a bit of that tropical in there, but the balance has shifted more towards raisins and prunes. A little bit leathery. It's still got that funky, dusty Springbank note. It's got a nice sort of savouriness on the nose. Ooh. No, that is different on the nose, actually. It's quite different on the nose. It's actually also, I don't know if you can tell quite on the camera, this one's actually a little darker as well. It's not just, it's visibly different. I'm wondering if maybe they've changed the recipe slightly, or it could just be a batch difference. That happens, especially with smaller batch whiskies like Springbank. So the older one is a little bit more sort of zesty, acidic on the nose. There's a little bit more of a lemony thing going on and more smoky. The new one, more tamed, more wood influence, more of that vanilla, more creaminess. The old one has more in common, I think, with the 10. It smells much more like the next step evolution in the 10-year-old, which going back and smelling the 10 now smells a lot sweeter and more sort of powdered sugary, interestingly. Ooh. Praise be. That is. The smoke is almost but a memory now. It's there, but it's left this sort of slightly ashy fingerprint on the whiskey. It's got that same rich sherry coastal note that you get in, say, the Bunnahabhain 18-year-old. A little bit more smoke, of course, in the Bunnahabhain 18-year-old, but that is not very much smoke at all. It's very, very minimal. Just an all-round great sherried whiskey. Yeah, very different. So I personally do not mind this whatsoever. To me, this is just another tasting note. But for those of you who are very sensitive to it, I am picking up the slightest bit of sulfur on the old version of the 15, which is not there at all on the new. A little bit of like a struck match thing. The table's a wee bit wobbly today. You know, I definitely prefer the new one. This one just feels a little bit lighter, a little bit more washed out almost. It's the same colours, but yeah, they've been faded. This one's a little bit more full, the volume's a little higher. Yeah, I think this batch is superior. And that's not to say that all of the new labels are better than all of the old labels. I mean, there's still going to be batch variation between each batch. Let's see if it actually says the exact batch number on here. So this one was bottled in February 2017. And this one was bottled in January 2019. So yeah, good 2 years apart in the bottling dates there. Yeah, it's interesting. No sulfur at all in the new one. But definitely a touch in the old. Very, very small amount, but there. And like I said, for me, that's just another tasting note. I do not dislike a hint of sulfur. Like any tasting note, if it's the only thing there, if it overpowers the whole whiskey, I think that's bad. But there are a lot of whiskies that aim to put a little bit of that meaty sulfuriness into the whiskey, and that's not a bad thing. I think a lot of people, the S word scares them away, and embrace a little bit of that struck mash. I think that's my motto. But again, if you don't like it, you don't like it, and no one can tell you to like it if you don't like it. But if you're on the fence and you have this opinion that a sulfured whiskey, or a sulfury whiskey rather than sulfured, a sulfury whiskey is like always bad and a sign of a bad whiskey, it's not necessarily the case. A touch can be a good thing. A bucketful is not great. It's actually, yeah. It's not like anything else. Like if you have a whiskey which tastes really strongly of apples, that's quite nice. It's a little one-dimensional. If you have a whiskey that tastes very strong of sulfur, that's really bad actually. So yeah, I mean it's not exactly the same as other flavors, but I think in small amounts, I don't think it hurts. And I like it. I think it adds a little bit of interestingness to it. All right. Yeah, Springbank 15. Gorgeous whiskey, and one that is relatively difficult to find here in BC. It comes to us maybe 2 times a year, usually. Luckily, we have a pretty good relationship with the rep here in BC. He lets us know when it comes in to make sure we always get some. But yeah, it's a really hard one to find. We actually, when we first set up the web store, the Springbank 15 was one of the more popular ones for sale on there. Just people over in the Okanagan who don't have access to it normally. So yeah, if this sounds like it's up your alley, we have a couple of bottles now on the web store. Once it's gone, we have no idea how long it's going to be until the next batch arrives, especially with the COVID situation. There are a lot of delays right now in things coming from Scotland. You might see some of your favourite whiskies disappearing for a few months, unfortunately. But yeah, Springbank 15, glorious whiskey. And I especially like this batch, which is, I believe, the same batch that we have in store right now. It might be slightly different. I could take a look at that. But yeah, glorious whiskey. It's normally $179.91, putting on sale today for a little while for $158.17. So if you pick it up shortly after this video airs, you can save a good $21 there. Better than a kick in the teeth, eh? So, how else has Springbank been experimenting and changing throughout the years? Well, in 1973, they did a full sort of 180 turn and decided, hey, the tide's turning the other way. People are actually wanting this heavily peated whiskey again. This is sort of after the release of Lafroig as a single malt, and the world was starting to tune into this idea of a big, strong, peaty Islay style whiskey. And they wanted to jump on that game. They knew they could, and they knew they probably should, so they did. They released a brand called Longrow, which was made in-house using the same sort of equipment, the same ingredients, but treated very differently. So Longrow was the name of another distillery down the road, again on Longrow Street. And this time they decided to forgo that extra step and just go straight double distillation and use peated malt that's peated at 50 parts per million. 50 ppm is actually pretty high. It's a high spec for peated malt. That's higher than Lafroig. It's higher than Lagavulin. I think they're both in the around 45 kind of mark as far as I remember. I know that Ardbeg is 55, so it's just a little bit less peaty than Ardbeg. So they decided to go down that route, and to this day they still make the long row peated. So I'm going to start staggering some of these. Make more room on the table. There we go. So, very different label. Here is the long row. Same bottle shape though, because you may as well, right? If you're going to do everything in-house, why overcomplicate things? Just order a shit ton of the same bottle and just stick different labels on. So, long row peated Campbellton single malt Scotch whisky, 46%. Distilled, matured and bottled in Scotland by J&A Mitchell and Co Limited, Campbellton, Scotland. What's it say here? Gives you a little bit of history as well. So first distilled in 1973, Long Row is a double distilled, heavily peated single malt produced at Springbank Distillery in Campbellton. The malt is peat dried for up to 48 hours to give the whisky a unique Campbellton style smoky character. So, as I was actually mentioning earlier, there are ways to make whiskey using peat without imparting that much peaty flavour. If you want to go the other way around, then you could smoke it for 48 hours. That'll put some peat in there. That'll make that grain smoky. Less than 100 casks of Long Row are filled every year. Less than 100 casks. That is not much whiskey. So, yeah, I mean, a cask is generally around that 200 litre-ish kind of mark, depending on what the cask is, if it's a hogshead or what have you, but the resultant spirit. So let's say on the lower end of things, let's just say 200 bottles because it's easy math. So we're looking at about 20,000 bottles of this made a year. That is practically nothing in the scale of whiskies. And that's not just this edition, that's the special editions, the Long Row Red, the CV, all of those other Long Row releases. So the fact that we never seem to have a problem getting Long Row here is pretty good. Like, it doesn't have the name for itself as the regular Springbank editions, so other stores don't seem to snap it up, but we never seem to have that much of a problem keeping Long Row on our shelves, which is nice. So it's good. This whiskey is not chill filtered, a natural haze made, blah, 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 blah. Cool. So yeah, I know that not only is it 100 casks, but actually it's less than 10% of the distillate that is produced every year at Springbank is the double distilled, heavily peated Long Row distillate, which is pretty cool. So about 8 times more Springbank is made than Long Row. All right. So, I am always amazed at how little smoke there is on the nose of this Long Row. I always hear like, oh, it's heavily peated, it's double distilled, it's 50 ppm. I'm always expecting Ardbeg, frankly, on the nose. I'm always expecting Lagavulin Lafroig. I never quite get it. This is not that smoky at all right now. I mean, it's smoky. It's definitely a peated whiskey, but it's not blow your socks off on the nose. Again, 46%. It's got a lovely creamy lemon curd thing on the nose right now. But there it is on the palate. Nice, rich, earthy peat. It's not medicinal. I don't get really any sort of iodine notes on this at all. It's just a nice, big, rich, earthy, deep flavour profile. The smoke, again, it's actually much like the Kilkerran smoke that I was talking about earlier with that bonfire that gets rained on. It's natural. Purely natural. Very bourbon cask. I don't think they use any sherry in the long rows. I think this is pure bourbon. Certainly looks it. It's got that vibrant yellowish hue to it. But yeah, it's young. It doesn't have an age statement, right? This is probably, if I were to guess, 7, 6. It's young. It doesn't have that much wood influence on it, and that's a good thing because it means that you're getting more of that raw, unadulterated spirit flavor. When you've got a spirit that is this characterful, you don't want to hide it behind too much wood. Like the balance, you want it to be off. You want it to be more on that spirit side when you've got this kind of peaty style whiskey. This is not a whiskey you want to hide behind 20 years in a port cask or something, right? I mean, a 20-year-old port cask long row, probably very, very good, but it would be very, very different to this edition. It's not what they're aiming for in this release. If anyone's ever had a 20-year-old Portwood Long Row, let me know, and let me know how the hell I can try it too, because that sounds great. I think the oldest Long Row I've had was a 17-year-old or so. Hard to remember. I know I had a fantastic Long Row recently that Leon brought back from Scotland, Leon Webb. It was actually, I believe, one of his first reviews on his YouTube channel. Go check that out. I'll try and put a link in the chat if I remember. Yeah. That was a cool evening. I was actually myself and Brett and Kristen. We were up there for the Comox Whiskey Festival earlier this year. So we were sat in Leon Webb, the distillery shelter point. Sat in his living room. We could see the cask warehouse through his window. And we were sat in the living room with Foodquig, who is a hilarious guy. Hi Foodquig, if you're watching. And not only did we have a fantastic long row, we also had some North Korean whiskey that had a little vegetable floating in it. One of the worst things I think I've ever had. We should try and get Leon to do a review of that one day. That'd be brilliant. So, long row. Peat, but not as you know it. Really, really good. And yeah, a perfect example of just swapping your style, changing it up on the fly a little bit, and coming up with a completely new whiskey using the same distillery, using the same equipment and the same concept and ideals. Really cool whiskey, the Long Row. But they didn't stop there. So in 1973, they brought out Long Row, and then 24 years later, 1997, they started triple distilling. Something that you only normally see in either Irish whiskey or in Auchentoshan, and Ben Romack, of course, does it a little as well. There's a few distilleries that do some triple distillation in Scotland, but it's mostly, historically been more of an Irish thing, and even then, it's a more relatively recent thing. So they started triple distilling, and then in 2005, they released their very first Hazelburn. It was 8 years old at the time. Hazelburn, again, is one of the lost distilleries in Campbellton. It's a homage to a long-lost neighbour. And actually, it was the biggest, I think, in terms of production in Campbellton. I know that it was one of the distilleries that Masataka Taketsuru, who started Nika, it was one of the distilleries that he studied at along with Longmorn. So that's pretty cool. So not only is it triple distilled, it's 100% air-dried malt. No peated malts at all in Hazelburn. I'm laughing because I've had many Hazelburns that taste slightly peaty. I'm assuming from cross-contamination. Yes, there's no peated malt going into it, but I'm pretty sure they use wooden washbacks and things at Springbank, so there's going to be a little bit of smoke retained in a lot of the equipment if they're using peated malt for the rest of the year. I know that Hazelburn, much like Long Row, only 10% of the whiskey produced in a year at Springbank is the triple distilled and peated Hazelburn. So there's going to be a lot of other whiskey, peated whiskey, soaked into all of the wooden equipment that they use there. Anyway, I was off track. What was I talking about? So yeah, it's also taken at a higher ABV, around 75%, and the aim is to have a much lighter, fruity, more subtle whiskey. Now, a lot of you are thinking, why the hell did you just have 5 peated whiskies followed by an unpeated whiskey. I've been training for this moment. I'm going to reset my palate using a couple of little tricks. But more importantly, I'm doing it for historical reasons. This is the most recent release from Springbank, and I wanted to tell the story. If you were doing this at home and trying to get the most out of the whiskies, I would probably recommend doing it the other way around and starting with the Hazelburn, to be honest. But for some reason, decided to go chronological. So, big glass of water, and I'm going to drink at least half of this. Oh, the whole thing wasn't as big as I thought. Interesting glassware, by the way. This is the official Rydell Coca-Cola glass, which is brilliant. This is like Rydell crystalware, and it actually has the Coca-Cola logo on the bottom there. I love this glass. It was on clearance at the Bay. I think this cost me $2. Because who the hell in the right mind wants to pay $30 for a Coca-Cola glass? I don't know. Probably why no one did. Anyway, the other thing you can do to reset your palate, there's many other things that people do. Black coffee is a fantastic one. I wish I had a pot going, but I didn't think that much in advance. One thing that you can do, sniff the inner elbow. Yes, just enjoy your own musk, your own aroma, and it helps set everything back to neutral. So I hear. Seems to work. I have no scientific proof, but it seems to work. So, I don't have any peaty, smoky, ashy flavors in my mouth at all right now, which is a good sign. So let's go in with some Hazelburn. This is the new standard release. This is the Hazelburn 10-year-old. Hazelburn is a triple distilled, completely unpeated single malt produced at the Springbank distillery. Like all our other single malts, Hazelburn single malt whiskey has not been chill filtered, nor has any caramel been added. This may cause a slight haze, etc., etc., etc. Beautiful. Yeah, again, 46%. Interesting thing to note, the Springbank releases that are all 750s. These are both 700ml bottles, so they, British size rather than the North American size, or the American size rather, which is interesting side note. Probably because they don't produce in enough volume to make it worthwhile doing the different bottle size. But also possibly because they don't import them to the States, maybe. I don't know. I can't remember ever seeing Long Row and Hazelburn in the States. But I haven't spent that much time shopping for whiskey in the US, to be honest. So, who knows? I love this bottle. I mean, I don't love it entirely from a design perspective. I think the label's a little bit shit. But I love the fact of how crooked, I don't know if you can tell, how off-center the labels are from each other. Like, this is too far to the left, or this to the right, but I think this one's too far to the left because it didn't line up with the back one at all. This is on an angle, it's slightly higher on this side, slightly higher on this side than this side. It's very handmade looking, and you can definitely tell, especially on this bottle, that it was bottled by a human being, not a robot, who was just stood there, potentially slightly drunk. I don't know if you're allowed to drink on the job, probably not. But yeah, it's very heartening to see an imperfect label placement. It makes it feel more rustic and real. Okay. Hazelburn 10. So this was released. They used to have a Hazelburn 12. This replaced it. I think this was introduced in around 5-6 years ago, maybe 2014, 2015. I did have the 12 back in the day as well. Interestingly, the last time we had a special edition from Springbank here in BC at the Strath was a Hazelburn. I think it was an 8-year-old Barolo cask Hazelburn, which was really cool. But you very rarely see the special editions here in BC. For some reason, I guess we're just not a big enough market for them. I've been trying to work on the importers, trying to get them to bring us some of the more interesting special limited editions, but I'm just glad we can relatively easily get these 4 standards, because there are many parts of the world where you can't even get these. Yeah, appley. Very, very appley on the nose. A little bit of a dusty custard kind of thing. Still got that funk, for want of a better word. Yeah, very, very appley. A little lemon. Yeah, custard, apples on the palate as well. Much lighter, a little grassy, a little floral. Yeah. Nothing wrong with the Hazelburn. I personally think that my favourite of the three sort of different labels is the Springbank. I think there's probably a reason that they make 80% of the whiskey they make is the Springbank. But I'm really glad they have the Longrow and the Hazelburn. And there's a lot of people I know that really love one or the other, or both. I've got some friends who are absolute Hazelburn nuts. And I've heard it before, actually. I've heard many people say that Hazelburn is a very interesting, almost quizzical thing, because it shows there's so much depth and flavour in this triple distilled whiskey that is potentially lacking in other triple distilled Scottish whiskies. And it's all down to the production style. It's not just that it was triple distilled. They use different malts, different fermentation times, different techniques. It's a very different, well-designed triple distilled whiskey. If you've never had a Hazelburn before and you go into this thinking it's going to taste like, I don't know, Auchentoshan, it's not Auchentoshan. It's definitely not Auchentoshan. It's more akin with the Benroma triple distilled stuff. But yeah, it's a really good full flavor springtime. As much as I was joking with the link between spring and Springbank, Springbank's honestly more of a fall whiskey in terms of flavor profile. This is a spring summer whiskey. This is something. This is a summer day whiskey. It's glorious. Yeah, nothing wrong with the Hazelburn. I just at this moment realised I don't think I actually told you the price of the Longrow. So I'm going to tell you the price of both the Longrow and the Hazelburn, because I love the fact that these are so much cheaper than the Springbanks. Like Springbank, despite them making, an 80% of the whiskey they make goes under the Springbank label, you'd think that would mean that these, being smaller production, more limited edition, would be harder to find and more expensive. Well, in many parts of the world, they are harder to find. At the Strath, again, we generally have both of them year round. But they're actually less expensive by a fair chunk as well. So the Longrow Peated is normally $112.96. You can get it right now for $99.91, which is great. The Hazelburn 10 is only a couple of bucks more than that for a 10-year-old age statement, right? 10 years old official age statement, $118.17. Right now, $104.26. $104.26 for this really quite small batch. So they make around the same amount of Hazelburn as they do Longrow. So again, about 100 casks a year of the Hazelburn whiskey. Very, very, very small amount. So if that sounds like it's up your alley, head to strathliquor.com right now. We're still doing, right now, at time of recording, we're still doing the 7 days a week, same day delivery on all orders made before noon for people who live in and around Victoria. If you're up in or out in Langford, we will still happily deliver to you. We'll charge you $2 extra for the gas, but also it's only 3 times a week rather than every day that we deliver out to the outer reaches of the Victoria area. If you're elsewhere in BC, the good news is that Canada Post is now happy for us to ship with them again. You can have a bottle of whiskey shipped to you anywhere in BC. I recommend getting 6 bottles because that's what makes the postage more worth your while. You can get 6 bottles of whiskey posted, let's say, to Burnaby. I think it's around $25 for 6 bottles. So the postage really isn't much, especially if you are a Premier subscriber and you get 10% off all your whiskies, or if you're buying whiskies that are on special, like many of these. You will end up saving more on those discounts than you spend on the postage. So a great way of getting some fantastic whiskies to your door, or any other products that we stock at the Strath. So thank you for joining us here today for this fantastic little trip down Longrow Road, or Longrow Street rather. Let me just give you a little bit of an idea of what we have planned for the next couple of weeks, because I am planning ahead. So thank you for joining us on this Sunday evening if you're watching live. If you like watching live and joining in with a live chat, join us again 7:30 on Friday, where we will have part 1 of the Scotch Malt Whisky Society of Canada's May Outturn. We will be having 4 of the 7 new releases in this part 1. Part 2 will be later in the month. So releasing 4 brand new S&WS bottles. Join us back here for that. This Sunday, this time next week, I'm going a little out of my comfort zone and talking about hockey. But not really about hockey, but hockey-themed whiskey. We're going to be doing some of the Wiser's alumni series. I've got 6 of those bottles that I'm going to be talking about. And then join us again on the Friday after that for a brand new special release. We have a trilogy of very special whiskies, a set of 3 from the incredible Billy Walker, a new project that Billy Walker is doing. And that is one definitely not to miss. If you're a fan of all of the past Billy Walker whiskies, like Glenallachie, for example, if you're a fan of his blends like the Lumreek, if you're a fan of the Glendronach, the Benriach, and the Glenglassaugh, this is a new thing. It's none of those whiskies. This is a brand new thing. It's very exciting. I can't wait to crack them open and share my thoughts with you on them. But yeah, in the meantime, Slán Sivar, stay well. I'll see you on Friday for the outturn. Good night.
Here's to whiskey kisses with the peachy taste of scent.